Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the government deciding to invest more in scientific research and development. We also talk about the recent discovery of low-frequency gravitational waves and why it matters. But first, we talk about the recent political upheaval in Maharashtra. Exactly a year after the Eknath Shinde-led rebellion split the Shiv Sena and toppled the Uddhav Thackeray government, the state has now witnessed another revolt. This time, led by senior NCP leader Ajit Pawar, who over the weekend left his party along with 8 other MLAs, joined the Eknath Shinde-led government, and on Sunday was sworn in as the Deputy Chief Minister of Maharashtra, a post he now shares with BJP's Devendra Fadnavis. This move not only comes as a serious blow to the Maha Vikas Aghadi, which is a coalition between the NCP, the Congress and the Uddhav Thackeray Shiv Sena, but is also a blow to the larger opposition camp ahead of the upcoming Lok Sabha elections. To know more about this, Indian Express's Shubhangi Khapre joins my colleague Utsa Sarmin to discuss the reasons and the impact of Ajit Pawar joining the ruling state government, which is a coalition between the Eknath Shinde Shiv Sena and the BJP. Their conversation took place on Monday afternoon.
So Shubhangi, can you tell us what led Ajit Pawar and other MLAs to leave the NCP and join the ruling government?
Yeah, the dialogue between BJP and Ajit Pawar faction has been there for quite some time now. And if we see in 2019, after the assembly elections, when Shiv Sena, also called BJP alleges they betrayed them. So when Shiv Sena distanced itself from BJP immediately took a strategic decision to approach NCP. And there were very strong figures from NCP also. And last minute, I think Sharad Pawar withdrew from the whole thing. But Ajit Pawar was not keen to go with Uddhav Thackeray, and that was very clear. Even in 2019, he was not willing to consider the leadership of Uddhav Thackeray as the chief minister. But anyway, since Sharad Pawar had already kind of patched up with Congress and Uddhav Thackeray, let's say now, he kind of had to give in, there was no other way because that was a consensus. But I think since then, whatever has happened yesterday, the origins is in 2019.
Right, so 2019 was when things started to go sour. But was there any issue in the recent past that triggered Ajit Pawar to join hands with Shinde and the BJP?
Yes. In the current context, Ajit Pawar is very unhappy because Sharad Pawar has elevated his daughter as a working national party president. And that means that sooner or later, she will be the boss. And even that would have been acceptable to Ajit Pawar because his ambition was never to take charge of the party at center. His ambition and his area of work was always Maharashtra. But what Sharad Pawar did is he made Supriya Sule in charge of Maharashtra state. And that is where Ajit Pawar was very, very upset. Divesting him of Maharashtra charge, I think, was the biggest blunder. And that probably must have expedited this whole process of Ajit Pawar trying to distance himself from the organization and asserting himself politically. And in a way, we can say this was a major challenge to his own uncle more than anything else.
Okay, and could you tell us how this move might impact Sharad Pawar's legacy and the NCP as a whole?
See, this thing has happened yesterday and it's just 24 hours, if at all, we must say. And when it comes to Sharad Pawar, decoding Sharad Pawar is extremely difficult. So even the leaders within their party and even the topmost politicians of Maharashtra or at center are still trying to figure out whether this whole decision or the whole split in the NCP, which is evident, was a revolt or was it a double game of Sharad Pawar. So we are still not giving 100%. We can't be very sure about it because, Sharad Pawar's googlies, everybody is very well aware of. And so sometimes you don't know what he says is exactly, it means the opposite. But given this fact, it is a thing that the biggest setback is to Supriya Sule in all this thing, I think. Because Supriya Sule has just taken charge as a party working president along with Praful Patel, of course. of course, under the shadow of her father as the party president. But here was an opportunity for Supriya Sule to reassert her leadership, first women party president of NCP, and probably the party would have projected her as the next chief minister of Maharashtra 2024. So in that sense, Supriya will be a bigger loser in this whole thing. And now the second thing is somebody who's so loyal to Sharad Pawar, who's worked under him, who's groomed under him. If he has taken a decision to join the BJP, then the question mark is whether it was just a split or whether there was some covert blessings. We don't know. So, it's very, very difficult to believe that, these people have actually done something without Pawar's consent. Or if it's true, then it's really shocking that what was the compulsion that they had to take such extreme decision.
Right, in Shubhangi, Eknath Shinde's Shiv Sena has been instrumental in forming the current government with the BJP, and the BJP itself has a powerful presence in Maharashtra. So why do you think they felt the need to bring in a third party under its fold?
Yes, the whole premises is, why does BJP, which says that we are the number one party in the world, we are the leading party with absolute majority at center, and we have the tallest leaders like Narendra Modi and Amit Shah at center. Despite all that, and in Maharashtra, of course, you have a very robust BJP party led by Mr. Devendra Fadnavis, who has been the CM and now the deputy CM. Now, with all this, and with being the largest party with 106 MLAs in Maharashtra out of 288, the question is, why does BJP need a third alliance? And vis-a-vis its equation with Shinde Shiv Sena. When BJP engineered the Operation Lotus in Shiv Sena, led by Uddhav Thackeray, they believe they will finish the Shiv Sena. Finish in the context of it won't remain the party with any reckoning in Maharashtra at least. And gradually there would be a huge shift of Shiv Sainiks across Maharashtra. But from what we see in last 1 year, that is not actually happening. And BJP soon realized that Shinde's leadership is not paying dividends which they had kind of expected or desired. So they have to now put plan B into action. And that's where they had to think of an alternative, and that's where they had to kind of make concerted efforts to split NCP and get Ajit Pawar faction to join their organization. And one more aspect here is when Shinde was brought in, the BJP thought probably he being a Maratha leader. He was never a Maratha. His leadership was always restricted to Thane and Mumbai districts. But he hails from Maratha community. So BJP thought, they could, as a political party with a huge cadre, they can empower him and project him as a Maratha leader under whose leadership the BJP can contest the next election. And gradually they thought that apart from Shiv Sainiks, they will also get away a sizable Maratha vote bank to their fold. But that was not happening because Shinde is not that charismatic. And Shinde's work also has not made that kind of an impact in last 1 year. So it has turned out to be a baggage for BJP instead of, helping them to gain electoral dividend. And that's where they are now worried about, because Maharashtra is a second important state after UP, where it actually has to get maximum seats, especially in Lok Sabha. So BJP will now project Ajit Pawar as the next Maratha leader. And who knows, probably gradually Ajit Pawar may also have been promised that he will be the next chief minister.
And talking about the 2024 elections, NCP is not only part of the MVA, but they have also supported the larger opposition camp against the BJP. So how does the recent rebellion affect the MVA and the larger opposition unity?
So, the enthusiasm, the impetus with which they started, and they were looking as a credible alternative to BJP, at least in Maharashtra, if not at center. I mean, I'm talking about the Great United Grand Opposition Front. So even if you discard that factor, at least in Maharashtra, there are reasons to believe that yes, MVA would have given a very, very tough fight to BJP in Maharashtra. Now with a faction and a very sizable faction of NCP going to BJP, I think the MVA is completely demoralized in that sense, because without a weak Sharad Pawar's party and a divided Uddhav Thackeray's party, I mean, that's like completely, they have to now focus next several years to rebuild their own organization, number one. And the Congress in Maharashtra is not very strong. They have a lot of problems, So had the NCP been together, Sharad Pawar was one leader who would have brought all regional forces together, like-minded secular parties together, and given BJP a real big battle. But I think with Ajit Pawar faction defecting to BJP, now there is a big question mark on the existence of MVA. Although they have yesterday made very bold statements saying that MVA will remain intact. We heard this from Prithviraj Chauhan, the former chief minister of Maharashtra. We heard this from Sharad Pawar, NCP president. But still there are big question marks because a divided party, I mean, where does it lead? And what kind of opposition is Maharashtra going to see? So these are very important questions. But a lot of things will also depend on how the results, what will be the outcome at center in 2024. Because the state assembly elections will happen later in October, November. So the first 2024 April-May general elections will determine the next roadmap for Maharashtra assembly elections.
And next we talk about India investing in scientific research and development. Last week, the government approved the proposal to set up the National Research Foundation, or NRF, which aims to promote, fund, and mentor scientific research in higher education institutions across the country. Now, the idea of this foundation was actually first floated in 2020 by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in his address to the Indian Science Congress. It was later mentioned by the Finance Minister in her budget speech that year, and also became one of the key recommendations of the new National Education Policy. To know more about this foundation, we are now joined by Indian Express's Esha Roy. So, Esha, tell us the reason why this foundation is being set up.
The reason why we are doing this is because science basically pushes innovation and therefore markets and economies. And India has been doing much better than we used to do before. But as far as our research and innovation are concerned, we are not up to par with most of the developed countries. And one of the reasons why the NRF is being set up and is being modeled on the lines of the hugely successful National Science Foundation of the United States is so that this gap between our research and research in countries such as Germany, UK, US, and China, with Japan, which are the leaders in research and innovation in the world, can be diminished. And also the fact that the scientific research is concentrated in just premier institutes in India, such as IITs. One of the main issues that the National Research Foundation will deal with is what the minister has called the democratization of science funding, which means the NRF will concentrate on promoting scientific as well as non-scientific research in not just urban areas, but semi-urban and rural areas, in institutes of higher learning, in districts, in states. So to be able to close the gap between, for instance, an IIT and a state university. So these are the two main targets that the NRF has.
And Esha, you mentioned that India right now does not invest enough in research and development. But could you also give a sense of how much India actually spends on it at the moment?
Yeah, so India spends about 0.7% of its GDP on research and development, which is extremely low compared to many other countries. In fact, the gross expenditure of research and development declined from 0.84% in 2008 to about 0.69% in 2018. This is despite the fact that the volume of research papers that we are putting out has actually increased. Nevertheless, investment in research is very low. In comparison, the United States spends about 2.83% of its GDP. China spends 2.14%. Israel spends 4.9%. And even Brazil, Malaysia, Egypt spend more of their GDP on their research than we do. And one of the main reasons that officials have pointed to for this matter has been that while we do have a sizable amount of funds, for instance, the Department of Science and Technology's main funding body, SCRB, they invest 1,39,000 crore rupees annually. The ministry spends this much on investment in R&D. But one of the huge gaps that India faces is that there isn't that much private investment from the private sector and from industry. So till date, the private sector investment in research is about 40%, which is sizable, but it's not enough. The other countries, such as the United States or the United Kingdom, 75% of their investment in R&D comes from the private sector and not from the government. In India, it's the other way around. The government spends more money on research than the private sector does. So in the NRF model that we are bringing in, there is an outlay of 50,000 crores estimated for the next 5 years. Out of this, 36,000 crores will come from industry. So initially, we're doing for projects that will be funded, 50% of a project will be funded by the government and 50% will be funded by a private concern. And the government is, of course, hoping that this increases with more private investment than government investment. And that is what will really tip the scales in India's favor.
And could you also elaborate and explain to our listeners why the private sector would be interested in doing so, in investing in R&D under this foundation?
So, the way market economies work is that it is extremely competitive. So when you have a private company or an industry, they are looking to constantly and perennially update their technology, bring in new innovations to beat out their competition. Now, all private companies do have in-house innovators. But for instance, the SURF head, Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, who's also one of the primary persons behind this bill, what he has pointed to is that while the private sector does have in-house innovators, they are lacking in hardcore scientific research, which is what takes place in universities and institutes of national importance like IITs and ICER and the Indian Institute of Science. These are the bodies that do hardcore scientific research. And therefore, there's a bit of an artificial segregation between the research that is done on one hand and the innovation that is carried out by the private companies and industries. Once this is brought together and coalesced, the research with the innovation, then the government feels that we will have higher standard innovations and innovations that are market driven. So the scientists are also no longer working in silos. They know exactly, because industry will constantly tell them that, look, this is what we need in this washing powder that you're developing. This is what I need to beat my competition. And then therefore the scientists can work on that line. So it's a lot of return for the scientist as well, because he or she will see, actual outcomes of their research that they're doing. So it's really a win-win, and industry gets to enjoy the perks of having scientists innovate for them. So it's really a win-win. As a matter of fact, a recent innovation index report that the DST brought out showed that innovation in companies in India is actually quite low. It's about 25%. So of all the companies in India is only about 25%. So there's a lot of ground that India needs to cover to be a global market leader.
Okay, so right now one problem is that we are not investing as much in R&D. But you also write that the other problem is that the number of students pursuing research is also very low in India, right?
Yes, I mean, that's because, well, for instance, a lot of students drop out from hardcore research along the way. And that's because, for instance, postdoctoral funding did not exist before. Research by postdoctorates did not exist before. The government did start it 5 years ago in anticipation of bringing in the NRF. But this is one of the key components of the NRF, to not just fund up to doctoral, but also after that as well, which will include people who are working in institutes, maybe in teacher or assistant teacher positions, who can simultaneously carry out research, therefore.
And you also mentioned that through the NRF, the government will try to bridge the funding gap that exists between institutions of national importance like IITs and other state universities. Could you talk about how it plans to do that?
Yeah, so how do you ensure that there's more research in state universities? So one way is that they're going to concentrate on setting up infrastructure and as well as training, so that students as well as scientists working in state universities can carry out research and do have the competitive levels to challenge a proposal from the IIT. The second method that they're going to use is that they're going to connect IITs to state universities so that IITs can be, or an ICER or an IFC, can act as a mentor to a particular university to provide impetus to the scientific research there. So these are some of the methods by which they're planning to bridge the gap. Once this happens, they expect a lot more research papers to come out of states and districts as well. Right now, they simply don't have the infrastructure, the know-how, and the funding will come from industry, when their proposals are good enough. So they expect a larger volume of research to come out after NRF is in place.
And in the end, we talk about an important scientific discovery. Last week, a group of international scientists found evidence that confirms what Albert Einstein had predicted more than 100 years ago. This evidence was that of low-frequency gravitational waves that are created by huge objects moving around and colliding in space. According to Einstein's theory of general relativity, every object bends the space-time continuum around it. To help understand this better, teachers often ask students to imagine a heavy ball kept on top of a stretched fabric. The ball is supposed to be any big object in the universe, and the fabric is supposed to be the space-time continuum. And now, because the ball is heavy, you can imagine that the fabric will bend. That bending of the fabric, or the space-time continuum, is what is supposed to be gravity. And if the ball were to move or bounce around, then it would create some kind of ripples in the fabric. And this is what gravitational waves are, which were first discovered in 2015. Now, with this latest discovery, researchers have also contended that these waves create a cosmic background hum, which they could hear, or rather interpret, through data. And this was made possible through something called pulsars. In this segment, Indian Express's Amitabh Sinha tells us about them.
So these pulsars are very heavy neutron stars, and they are in the process of dying, and they are rotating at very high speeds, probably thousands of times per second. And each time they rotate, they release some radiation which are captured on Earth as flashes of very bright light. So those bright light that we observe here in our telescopes are known as pulsars. So you can imagine there are these very fastly rotating stars releasing energy at very irregular intervals, maybe thousands of times every second. The very characteristic thing about these pulsars is the periodicity of their rotation, and therefore the light or the radiation that they send out. These are fixed and very, very precise. So that's why sometimes they are referred to as atomic clocks, because you can be very sure about the time period or the periodicity of these radiations. So that's what the scientists in this experiment used, these radiations coming from pulsars, as they try to measure, and used that to detect gravitational wave background.
Right, and how is it that the regular way in which they emit radiation helped scientists to detect these low-frequency gravitational waves?
Okay, so let's understand it like this. There is a radiation coming from a far-off planet, seen by our telescopes as bright flashes of light. And they come at very fixed intervals. They are coming in milliseconds, every millisecond. So they are roughly coming, let's say, 1,000 times a second. So you know that these are coming at a fixed intervals of time, and your telescope is receiving them. Now, the distance between Earth and that neutron star is a fixed distance. Now, what happens is, if there is an intervention of the gravitational wave in between, gravitational waves, by their very nature, they distort space-time. What that means is the distance gets distorted. So sometimes at some places, the distance can be lengthened, this distance can be contracted. So there is a change in distance. Because there is a change in distance, there would be a change in the time in which these pulsars are being received by the telescope. So by recording the time difference, by noticing that some of these pulsars were arriving a little bit early, some of them a little bit late than expected, scientists were able to show that the only thing that could be causing this is the presence of gravitational waves in between. And that's the experiment all about. This was a completely different way of detecting gravitational waves than the technique that was used in 2015.
Right, and back in 2015, they had detected high-frequency gravitational waves caused by the collision of these two massive black holes. But this time they have detected low-frequency waves. So could you tell us what exactly is the difference there?
See, any heavenly body, any body in the universe would produce gravitation waves if it is moving. But not all of them are detectable, in the sense that our instruments won't be able to detect because they would be very tiny. Now, the waves that were detected in 2015, if you remember, they were caused by a merger of two black holes. And, the merger process is quite a violent process in the sense that it's a highly energy intensive process. There's a lot of energy that is also emitted from this process. And these gravitational waves, when they originate from an event like this, those are the kind of waves that can be detected by our instruments. But what scientists say, and this is also the prediction from the general relativity, that these kind of events keep happening in the universe all the time. And in fact, very large bodies are involved in these kind of events, because of which you have a sort of a steady supply of gravitational waves, which are much stronger, but also have very long wavelengths and thereby very low frequency. So you have these wavelengths are very spread out. Some of these wavelengths would probably be even in terms of thousands or even millions of light years away. But they become very, very low frequency waves. But because so many of these events are happening all the time, the entire space-time or the empty space that we talk about in universe, they must be filled with these kind of gravitational waves.
Right, and leaning more into our previous analogy, one can imagine a giant fabric with objects of different sizes and speed, moving and colliding and causing the fabric to move as well.
Yeah. So all kinds of events and all kinds of gravitational waves with different frequencies, with different energies. So what this experiment has shown is exactly this, that your entire universe is filled with gravitational waves, different kinds of gravitational waves, so that the gravitational waves form a sort of a background, a continuing background. And because you have so many of them, scientists like to describe them as if there is some background noise or the hum. That's a more preferable word. That's a background hum. In 2015, what was detected was gravitational waves from a single event. What has been observed now is a whole range of gravitational waves from different events happening all the time and forming a background to everything that is happening in the universe.
And Amitabh, what do you think is the significance of a discovery like this?
Right. See, so when the gravitational waves were first detected in 2015, it gives scientists another tool to look at the universe. Also because we are talking about very large scale events which are producing these gravitational waves. The information gleaned from these can be used to study the large scale structures in the universe. And that's one thing that scientists are very keenly interested in, is about knowing about the evolution of the universe from the Big Bang till now, exactly what are the things that happened. So again, this particular observation actually gives another tool for scientists to study those kind of events, get more information about those kind of things that have been happening in the universe.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, with help from Utsa, Sarmin, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.